Welcome to the Functional Medicine Radio Show with your host, Dr. Carri Drzyzga, known internationally as the Functional Medicine Doc. Dr. Carri is committed to helping patients find the root cause of their health problems and fixing the cause with natural treatments so they can feel normal again. Dr. Carri is the founder of Functional Medicine Ontario and is the author of the hit book, Reclaim Your Energy and Feel Normal Again. Please welcome your host, Dr. Carri Drzyzga.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Functional Medicine Radio Show, the only internet radio show dedicated to giving you real solutions to improve your health. Not only are they real solutions, but they're natural solutions as well, because as you know, the one and only true wealth you have is your health. I'm your host, Dr. Carri Drzyzga, the Functional Medicine Doc, and I'm committed to helping you find the root cause of your health problem, fix the cause with natural treatments so you can feel normal again and live your life to the fullest. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before I introduce today's special guest. I'm so happy to announce that I'm now working on my third book. The title is Reclaim Your Digestive Health and Feel Normal Again, Fixing the Root Cause of Your GI Distress with Natural Treatments. Now, this book should be ready about mid-2016, so keep an eye out for it. That's it for our housekeeping, so let's get started. I'm so very excited about this week's show because my special guest is Dr. Joanny Liu. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's a doctor, author, speaker, brain expert, and international leader in Chinese sports medicine and Chinese sports psychology. Her newest book, and this is her third book due out later this year, is called Heal Your Concussion: How to Quickly and Effectively Get Back in the Game. One of Dr. Joanny's major strengths is her deep understanding of the connection between our psychology and our physiology. So basically, the connection between the brain and the body. Dr. Joanny became vitally interested in concussions due to her own adult son suffering a severe concussion that blinded him. It was with her already proven flow process that helped him take back control of his brain, his mind, and his life. Dr. Joanny, thank you so much for being my special guest today on this episode of the Functional Medicine Radio Show.
Well, Dr. Carri, I am so happy to be here with you and your audience today.
So as we are recording this interview, it's actually right before the holidays and right before the movie Concussion comes out with Will Smith. It'll be really interesting to see how that all pans out. Concussion is a very hot topic. Can you explain to our listeners in very simple, plain language, what are some of the most common signs and symptoms of a concussion? And how do we know when we could just shake it off and get back in the game and when we really need expert help?
Well, one of the major symptoms of a concussion is headache. Now, the thing is about headache is that it doesn't always appear right after being hit in the head. So the first thing that I would actually look for is eyesight. And pulling out something as simple as a credit card on the field and seeing if that person can actually read the numbers and the letters, the words on it. I think that's a very important first step. And then taking that person, of course, off the field and just looking after them and keep talking to them, keep asking them to read that card, give them a break. As far as looking for somebody, taking them to emergency, I really don't think in most cases that's necessary. It's much more important to make sure that that person is warm, so throw extra jacket on them. Most concussions can be handled at home with parents or some other caregiver. I don't particularly like the way the press is making it out that you have to panic over a hit to the head, because as you'll find out, there are things that you can do yourself.
Okay, so you mentioned headache as being one of the most common symptoms. Would that headache occur like pretty immediately, or are we looking at days or weeks after the concussion?
It really depends on the person. In the case of my own son, he actually drove himself home after thankfully his eyesight did come back. And it wasn't until he got home, I'd say about an hour after his concussion, that's when the headache started. For some people, there's a delay, so it really depends on the person. But you should be looking out for things like that. Nausea and vomiting is another thing. Loss of appetite, sleep problems, those are the things that you have to look out for.
Okay, so one of the things that I was wondering is because the brain is such a sensitive organ, it's encased in our bony skull. Once we get a concussion, does it make it easier to get another, like even with a smaller injury?
I don't believe that either. And some people get one concussion and that's the only one they ever get.
Mhm.
Some people get multiple ones, but it's really because they haven't solved the problem in the first place. So they keep getting concussion because they keep repeating some sort of behavior over and over again. So that's what you really have to look out for is what's different about the person before and after concussion. Because if it's your child or if it's a friend or a spouse, you should know what they were like before and after a concussion. And usually a concussion is a knock to the head to wake up over some particular behavior that needs to be changed.
Okay, so can you explain to our listeners what are some of the pitfalls of typical medical treatments that are given for concussion?
Well, that's the problem because there are no typical medical treatments out there in the conventional medical world. Unfortunately, what they usually tell you is to have complete rest, but unfortunately, recent research is saying that if you're forcing somebody to actually completely rest and do nothing, stay in a room by themselves for at least 3 to days to a week, then it can actually prolong the symptoms or make them worse.
Now that you explain that, that actually kind of makes sense to me because I think, okay, well, coming from my chiropractic background, when somebody has acute low back pain, in the olden days, I'll call it, the doctors used to tell them, like, okay, just lay down in bed for a
Yeah.
week to just rest it. And then we knew, like, that the research finally came out that that's actually the very opposite of what you should do. And so as you explain it with the brain, I kind of think, well, the brain is a very active organ. It's one of the
Yeah.
three key things to keep our brain healthy is circulation, oxygen,
Yeah.
and stimulation. And that
Yes.
resting the brain does not activate the brain, and it, I would think, like a muscle would start to atrophy in a way.
Well, it's not just the physical structural thing. It's also the psychological factor, because a person who is told, stop doing anything, stop doing everything, just lie here and be still. I mean, for several days at a time. I mean, what happens when somebody goes through that? Well, they start thinking about worst case situations. What am I doing here? What am I going to do? I mean, they actually get more in a panicking mode than a reassured mode because now they're left to themselves with themselves and their thoughts. So that's one of the other things is that they find is that a person who's gone through complete rest is probably more susceptible to depression because they're depressing themselves.
Yeah, actually, as you say that, that kind of reminds me. Okay, last weekend, usually Sundays, it's my day off. It's
Yeah.
my day off to rest. I check my emails once or twice just to make sure none of my patients are dying out there and they need immediate care. And so usually I'm not doing any work. It's my downtime. It's my total downtime. And actually, last Sunday, I sat on the couch so long that my back started to ache, and I just couldn't get comfortable. And I thought it would really suck to have to be like in complete bed rest, even for
Yeah.
a couple of days. Like it really hit me. And
Yeah.
I really felt a lot of empathy for these people that are ill and have to be stuck in bed, or these pregnant women that are on complete bed rest. So as you say that with a concussion, I
Hmm.
totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, we have all this wonderful research about neuroscience, neuropsychology, and neuroplasticity that's not being used, it's not being applied. And so in order to make changes to the brain, then we have to be thinking different thoughts and feeling different ways, because the brain is a highly emotional organ. So the more scared we are with the thoughts that we get, then what it's going to do is just build these neural networks about the wrong things, which, I mean, memory and emotion, those two things are so important. So for somebody who's just suffered a catastrophic accident that has made them feel just terrible, well, it's only going to be compounded on top of that if they are allowed to keep thinking that, oh my God, I got a concussion. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Oh my God, this is bad. This is bad. So all it's going to do is just build these neural networks which are not conducive to healing. So we've got to do other things that are much more conducive. And part of that is allowing the person who just suffered a concussion to actually make the decisions whether they're ready to do something or not. Because in the case of my son, he's a professional engineer. So he actually broke all the rules in conventional medicine because, uh, well, for one thing, it happened on a soccer field. So his teammates took him off the field, left him on the side, and that's when, he was trying to sort things out. That's when he found out that he couldn't see. So can you imagine the fear that he had when he couldn't see? I mean, his life just changed just like that. And so he doesn't know how long he was sitting there, but eventually his eyesight did come back. And so what was the first thing that this kid did? I mean, he was 28 at the time. He went back on the field. He went back on the soccer field because he felt responsible, because his team was shorthanded that day. And even though he wasn't feeling well at all, he figured that at least he could just stand out there like a pylon and allow his teammates to sub on and off to get a rest. And so then he did that until the end of the game, and then he drove himself home, and that's when the headache started. So he knew he had a concussion. He didn't need anybody to tell him that. And so what he decided was that he would drop all his extracurricular activities, all the fun things. But the one thing that he couldn't stop doing was work. And since he's a very professional engineer, he has a very packed schedule and an intellectually demanding job. He didn't stop. It was up to him. Except that when he finally came to me about over 2 weeks later, everything had gone from bad to worse. He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating, he had no appetite. This is a kid who hasn't missed a meal since he was born. And he knew he was burning a candle at both ends, and that eventually his work would suffer. But because he came to me, I told him, okay, you've got to do everything that I tell you to do, because there is a process to healing a concussion.
That is an amazing story, and I can only imagine how scary that would be. Because I know
Oh,
for me
yeah.
in my profession, I love practicing functional medicine. It is my passion,
Yeah.
helping patients, and I can only imagine the amount of fear that would go through my body if something happened to me and I couldn't practice.
Yeah, exactly.
So can we go back? So you talked about why rest is so bad. Now, are there other critical, massive mistakes that are typically made with concussions besides rest?
Well, I think another mistake is to actually listen to and believe all the negative hype on that's put out by the press. You've got to ignore all that, because unless you really want to be part of those statistics, So I highly recommend that you ignore any bad news around concussions.
So, are you talking about the information about dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about all the general negative press, all the blame and the finger pointing, and it's happening with the NFL, it's happening with the NHL,
Yes.
so it's all bad news. So you don't want to listen to that because there's already enough negativity in the world. And again, it's just going to inflate, reinforce those negative neural pathways about what you might think about your concussion. So I want everybody to think about healing and what it's going to be like when you're finally well, because that was the thing with my own son. He had made a very firm decision that he wasn't going to be like this. He wasn't going to be like this, and he did everything that I told him to do, even when it was very uncomfortable.
Okay, so you mentioned that rest is really bad, and listening to all of the negativity that's out there is really bad. Is there anything else that's like a really massive mistake?
Yeah. Now, I mean this in a very kind way. It's about drowning in low self-esteem. I mean this in a very kind way because so many people have been led to believe that they can't do anything for themselves.
Are,
When
are,
the
are, are you kind of talking about like playing the victim role? Is
Yeah,
that what you mean?
playing the
Yeah.
victim role, just following what the MDs say, which isn't a whole lot, right? They're not really very helpful. So once they find that you haven't gotten better after the rest period, they really don't know what to do. But I want people to know that there is something that you can do. Definitely.
So what I hear you saying is there's hope. There,
There's definitely hope.
there's a lot of hope, and part of that hope is deciding
Yeah.
that you want to get better.
Yeah. You got to make a decision. And you've got to lower your stress. Now, the thing is, what I'm going to say is stress is a major factor in brain health. And the more you feel upset about the situation, the more you are going to just make things worse. And it's going to prolong the effects of the concussion. Okay? So, stress is just merely feeling very bad about something and getting hyped up. So, you have to decide, okay, we're talking about the brain, so we're talking about thinking and feeling because it is a very emotional organ. So what you think about always has an emotional reaction to it. Every thought is neutral until you apply an emotion. So it's up to you when when something negative sneaks into your mind that you blow that thing out. You get it out of your mind immediately, and you start thinking about what you want and why you want it. And that will lead you to more optimism. Okay? Because stress kills brain cells.
Yeah, that's true. What Dr. Joni is saying is absolutely true. There was a ton of research that has been done by Dr. Robert Sapolsky from Stanford University, proving that the stress hormone cortisol,
Yeah.
it doesn't, well, I don't want to say it destroys your brain, but it does kill out brain cells and it shrinks your brain. And there are specific key areas that it does that.
Yeah.
And one of them is your memory
Yeah.
center. So you are absolutely right about the stress. So is that one of the steps of your flow process when it comes to actually fixing the concussion?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with, okay, so the way I help people to lower their stress level is to build up their self-confidence, their self-worth. Because when you have self-doubt, that's really when you get into stress. That's when you worry because you think you can't handle life. That's really what stress is about, because you think you can't handle things. But instead, I have people show themselves through some of the work that they do with me that they really are a fantastic person, that they really have in the past been able to overcome uh, almost insurmountable challenges to get to where they are, and that they can do it again. But so many people, even really successful people, haven't got that self-confidence and seeing all those wonderful things that they did, ingrained inside their psyche. Even the most successful people suffer from low self-esteem. So it's my job, my work, to help people to raise that self-worth and therefore become much more optimistic, which is much more healthier for the brain and therefore recovering.
So, can you walk us through the flow process and kind of give us examples along the way?
Let's see. Well, flow stands for freedom. That's the end point. L is for learning, O is for optimism, and W is for wisdom. So, the first thing that we need to do is learn a lot more about how our brain works, because if you know what you're doing to it, whether you're being optimistic or being pessimistic and negative, then you can make better decisions about how you're going to handle the situation, okay? Because what you don't know is what you don't know, and you need to know. So, for example, I'll teach people about where exactly the brain is going to be shrinking. I'll teach people about how that stress mechanism affects the brain and the nervous system. I'll talk about how the mind-body connection isn't hard to prove. For instance, when you're angry, your blood pressure goes up, your heartbeat goes up. I mean, that's the mind-body connection. It's not hard to prove. It's there. For optimism and wisdom, it's interrelated, because wisdom is about self-knowledge in this particular case, and wisdom is also about experience. So the more you know about yourself, the more you know that you are a fantastic, strong person, then the more optimistic you're going to be. So it's about learning, wisdom, and optimism. It's not really a linear, simple mathematical equation. It's really more like a chemical equation. So because everything is so intermixed. But the thing is that it's your psychological state that will influence your physical state. In this case, it will be building brain material in order for you to become well, because you are changing your attitude. And so you will build a stronger brain and also have a much stronger emotional state as well. And that's what catapults you to healing a concussion, or anything for that matter.
So now, Dr. Joanny, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, thinking about what my listeners are probably, what are they thinking in their mind right now? They're probably thinking, it can't be that simple, that it's just like mind over matter is what it kind of sounds like. So can you give us a real case example, maybe your son or maybe a different patient? Because I know that you're a fabulous doctor and you've worked with thousands of concussion patients. So just kind of playing that devil's advocate, how would you address that?
Okay, so my son's case was pretty upsetting, of course, because he's my son. And when he asked me for help, I said, well, let's back up. Because a few years earlier, we were both at school. So he was at the University of Alberta studying chemical engineering, and I was at school studying traditional Chinese medicine. And one day he called me up and he was extremely upset. And he told me that a friend of his had just committed suicide. And he said, Mom, why would he do that? Because I guess his dad had just been diagnosed with brain cancer. And he said, why would he kill himself? Because something like that was not on his radar. It was just impossible that anybody would ever do that. And I said, well, it's probably not his dad's brain tumor that pushed him over. He probably had so many other things that made him unhappy that was the last straw, and then he decided to kill himself. And then I said to him, Nolan, whatever problems you have, come to see your mom and dad, because we will always be there to help you, and don't ever give up. So that night, many years later, when he asked me for help, of course I said yes. And then I said, you have to do everything that I tell you to do. And like I had said earlier, some of the things that he had to do would be very uncomfortable. Now, a lot of engineers are very quiet. And they're not going to be telling you, spilling their guts about how they feel about stuff and this sort of thing. But I guess at the time, Calgary was a really hot employment market, and he was missing a supervisor, and I guess the company finally got a new supervisor for them. And so this guy in his very first meeting said, well, I want to be your friend, guys, which doesn't go over well with a bunch of young engineers. No, they want a leader. So Nolan really loves working for this company. He didn't want to quit, but he also didn't want to work for this guy. So he was in a quandary. He had told me about this problem earlier in the summer, but we didn't know how bad it would be until he got his concussion. Because the concussion is actually a clue as to confusion and lack of clarity. Okay? That's what a concussion really tells you. And so that's the psychological part. And so to get him out of that confusion, I asked him to set up meetings with his boss when he was healing, and have a weekly meeting with this guy and ask him for what he wanted from his manager. And he could have said no, because I said there's no guarantee that this guy even cares what you're going through, but you're the one who's having this problem, so you've got to go out and solve this problem yourself. And like I said, he could have refused because he's a shy, quiet guy.
And he's your son.
Yeah, and he's my son. And it was really hard for him. But he had made that decision, that he had made a promise to me that he would do everything that I told him to do, and he did. So he did it on a weekly basis, and I checked up with him every week to make sure he was on, and he did it. And the thing is, week by week, he got better and better, stronger and stronger. A few weeks had gone by, and he was back at practices again. And then he started the indoor season in early November, a few weeks later. So it had only been a couple of months. So he was making good progress. And the reason why that happened was because he was taking control of the situation. He was taking control of his own healing process with my help. But he was doing most of the work. And that's what's important, is doing the work, getting it done, and healing. So the psychological part, it's got to be there. You can't just treat the headaches expecting that is going to come to a full healing conclusion. You have to deal with how you feel about whatever it is that's bothering you at the time, because that truly is the root cause of the problem. The concussion just happened to be physical manifestation of his particular situation, which was confusion and lack of clarity at the time, because he thought he only had two choices: quit or stay and suffer. But no, he actually had at least one more, and he figured out how to take control of the situation. So it's been more than 3 years. He's had no relapses, no more headaches, no eye problems, nothing. He's in perfect health and doing exactly what he loves.
So, Dr. Joanny, that's an amazing story, and I can only imagine how rewarding it is for you, because I bet you see patients in your private practice. I bet you see them and they've been suffering for years, and you work with them, and then finally it's like they're cured, that there really is hope. You change their life, and of course that has a ripple effect through their lives. But yeah, it's so rewarding.
Well, it's because they do the work. I mean, that's really what comes down to it. They're all willing to do the work and become well and believe that they can become well, and the hope and the optimism that they have as they're getting better, that's what's most gratifying for me, because I see the progress in the way they look at life and the way they look at themselves. It's astounding sometimes.
Now, through this process, is this the kind of treatment that can be done from a distance? Can you see concussion patients over Skype or over the phone, or do you have to see them face to face in your office?
Oh, I can definitely talk to people through their issues, give them homework, all done long distance as well.
Oh,
Definitely.
that's really handy because no matter where you're at in the world, then you could
hmm
meet with Dr. Joanny and get her expert guidance to lead you through her flow process to fix your concussion.
Definitely.
Dr. Joanny, how can our listeners find out more about you?
Well, you can go to my website, which is Joanny, JOANNY.com. You can also pick up 2 of my books on Amazon.com. One of them is called Knockout Concussions, and the other one is Heal Your Concussion, 21 Days to Brain Health. They actually make a pretty good duo together to work on either your concussion or post-concussion syndrome. And in the new year, I will be having a 3rd book come out called Heal Your Concussion, How to Quickly and Effectively Get Back to the Game.
So, for our listeners out there, I'll make sure that all of those links are in the podcast notes so you can easily find Dr. Joanny and her books. And I did get a sneak preview of Dr. Joanny's newest book, Heal Your Concussion, which is an awesome title. And I can assure you that it's a very unique and different approach to concussion, and that it works. Dr. Joanny, thank you so much for being my special guest today. This has just been an awesome interview.
Thank you, Dr. Carri. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, that wraps up this very special episode of the Functional Medicine Radio Show with Dr. Joanny Liu. And I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. And I'd like to invite you back next week for another episode of the Functional Medicine Radio Show. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Carri Drizga, the Functional Medicine Doc. Have a great week, everyone.
You've been listening to the Functional Medicine Radio Show with your host, Dr. Carri Drizga, known internationally as the Functional Medicine Doc. Dr. Carri is committed to helping patients find the root cause of their health problems and fixing the cause with natural treatments so they can feel normal again. Dr. Carri is the founder of Functional Medicine Ontario and is the author of the hit book, Reclaim Your Energy and Feel Normal Again. Please tell your friends about the Functional Medicine Radio Show, and we'll see you next week with more from Dr. Carri.